Are you curious about bodies, pleasure, and possibilities? And what about curious about what others are up to on the planet when it comes to pleasure, sex, and play? Have you considered what pleasure can do for your life, your body, and your bank account? Do you know something magical, delightful, and out of this world orgasmic is not only possible for you, but totally available to you? If you're ready to be the magical, sexual, sexy beast you know you can be, and you just need the tools to get there, you're in the right place. Now, here's the host of The Pleasure Zone, sensual movement artist, relationship and sex alchemist, Milica Jelenic.
Welcome, my sweet pleasure seekers. For those of you who are tuning in and you're a regular to this show, you might have been noticing that lately I haven't had a lot of guests on, but I have a guest on tonight. It's Alan Annand. And for those of you who are avid listeners, you've heard Alan on the show before, where we talked, I think it was a few years ago when we talked about the dawning of the age of Aquarius and how in Vedic astrology, it's not the same. So Alan gave us a very bright new look at that to have a different perspective. And I always love a new perspective. We have lots to talk about today. Alan has written several books, and we'll be talking about his latest book, along with about some information about some things he's putting together. So for those of you who don't know who Alan Annand is a Vedic astrologer. He's a graduate of both the British Faculty of Astrological Studies and the American College of Vedic Astrology. He's also a palmist and much published author. His New Age noir crime novels feature an astrologer protagonist whom one reviewer has dubbed Sherlock Holmes with a horoscope. Doesn't that sound freaking great? For one thing, I love murder mystery, and throw in some astrology, even better. His nonfiction books on astrology have been praised for the quality of their research and writing. In his latest book, Kama Yoga, Love, Marriage, and Sexuality in Jyotish is, I think I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, Jyotish?
Jyotish.
Is a Jyotish. Oh, that's pretty good. Is a complete guide to personal relationships as seen through the lens of Vedic astrology, and can be purchased on Amazon. We do have Alan's information available on Inspired Choices Network, as well as in the description links to any of the podcast and TV locations that you can find. The video descriptions, you'll find links to Alan's website so that you can get his books there. So Alan, I'm so grateful to have you on. It's always a great conversation. You're always super playful on my social media, all about, anytime I post something sex, you're there. You're always there for the sex stuff. Not necessarily the other stuff, but it's all good. I appreciate that. So what had you, first of all, I want to just kind of backtrack so that people can know, can you give us a brief difference between what is Vedic astrology, what is Western astrology, so those people who are listening can have a little bit of background on that?
Yeah, sure. So the basic difference between Vedic astrology and what we call tropical Western astrology is the zodiac that is used. So for millennia, astrologers or sky watchers would look in the sky and they would identify clusters of stars called constellations that did not move. I mean, they're fixed stars, and the planets would be seen moving against that starry background. Those were the constellations as established by the fixed stars. But later on in time, some astrologers began to use a different zodiac, which was slowly drifting through the entire zodiac, where the first day of spring. So we all know the first day of spring is March 21st. That's when the sun crosses the equatorial plane heading north. Once upon a time, that would have occurred in Aries, where if you sighted on that sun, extended the line of sight out into the starry constellations, it would have been in Aries. But over time, that what we call the vernal point, the vernal equinox, slowly drifts backwards. It's because Earth is like a top spinning on its axis, but it's got a little wobble to it. So it's kind of complex to imagine. But anyway, this vernal point regresses slowly through the zodiac, such that these days, when you look at, the first day of spring, March 21st, and look at that sun and sight upon it out to the constellations behind, it's actually in the starry constellation of Pisces. So now Western astrologers continue to benchmark all planetary positions against this vernal equinox where the sun is on March 21st, and they call that 0 Aries. Everything else around the zodiac slotted into place accordingly. Meanwhile, Vedic astrologers and astronomers, for that matter, will look at a planet, sight through it, and look out to the starry constellations which do not move, and that is the sidereal zodiac which we use. So the basic difference between the two is in time the two zodiacs separate by almost a whole sign. So whereas you might think you're a Leo in tropical astrology, you might be a Cancer, probably are a Cancer in Vedic astrology. That, along with the fact that Vedic astrologers only use planets that we can see with the naked eye. That's as far out as Saturn. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto cannot be seen with the naked eye. And so until 1784, there was no Uranus in the sky. Until 1830, there was no Neptune. Until 1931, there was no Pluto. Western astrologers have fitted those outer planets into the zodiac and their rulerships of signs. Vedic astrologers don't do that. We still use what is called an ancient system. And yet, nonetheless valid, of course, and we stand by, our choices.
Yeah, for sure. So with everything that moves like that, out of curiosity, so technically I'm supposed to be in Western astrology. I'm a Pisces, so born on March 2nd. When this shift goes back, and I could potentially be in Aquarius.
You would be. Your sun would be in Aquarius, definitely, in the sidereal zodiac. Yep.
Yeah. So if we're going to look at both of these, and they both have the potential to be accurate, I'm just curious about this part before we move on.
Yeah.
Is there like a comparison between, like, if is like the Piscean sign similar to the, like, would being Pisces in the, what you call it, the vernal, was it vernal that you called it?
I referred to the vernal point, but I'm going to scoot ahead, I think, and anticipate your question.
Yeah.
All signs have qualities. And when you prepare a horoscope, it's not just the sun sign. There's what we call your ascendant or rising sign. There's the planet that rules that. The moon is important. The sun is actually less important than the ascendant. The sun is less important than the moon. So there's many variables. At a very minimum, any horoscope has 3 key factors: the ascendant, the moon, and the sun, in that order of primacy, because the ascendant changes fastest. Then the moon changes every 2.5 days. The sun only changes every 30 days, changes sign, I mean. So, and there's a whole lot more. There's another, 5 true planets, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, in the horoscope as well too. Each one of those will be in a different sign, and it will rule or have governance over a certain part of your chart, perhaps the chart that rules children, perhaps the chart that rules a parent, perhaps the part of the chart that rules the career or the spouse or whatever. These are all variables that change according to the zodiac you choose to use to interpret a chart. And the variances can be significant. Sometimes you'll get overlaps and concordance. Other times you'll get wildly different interpretations. Of course, Vedic astrologers, are adamant about our system is the best one because it's been around for millennia. It's still used in India to this day. It's a long-standing living oral tradition, whereas some Western astrology, let's say Hellenistic astrology, which was practiced around, turn of the millennium. And then for years and years and years, more than years, centuries fell into disuse, such that there were no active practitioners to discuss how a horoscope is interpreted. So all that was left were extant ancient texts, which modern Greek scholars would have to interpret to the best of their abilities, knowing astrology or not, making sense of it within the context, and trying to, draw proper interpretations from horoscope. As opposed to Indian astrologers, there's been a constant lineage. Grandfather would teach father, father would teach son, a living oral tradition. Nobody ever forgot what this meant and how it was to be interpreted because it never ceased being used, as opposed to Hellenistic astrology, for instance, where there were huge gaps in application and knowledge.
Okay.
Long answer.
So
for short question.
that's cool. So part of the question was actually more about are some of the qualities, because the qualities you were saying that there are different qualities in obviously in each sign, like I'm aware of that. Do some of the qualities translate over, like having, I'm just using sun signs as an example because a lot of people can relate to sun signs more than anything, especially
Yes.
probably my viewers who don't have like a lot of experience having their astrology charts done, or maybe they do. I know that one person on here is actually very, very educated in that. So,
Yeah.
so one of the things I'm wondering about is like, if I have, they might say some things in Western astrology about what Pisces means if you have your sun in Pisces. Are some of those qualities of Pisces the same as the qualities of Aquarius in Vedic astrology? So you could be
No.
a very different character completely.
Exactly, and that would be the danger of trying to interpret somebody's horoscope based upon sun sign horoscopy only, because a Pisces is a dreamy, imaginative, alcoholic drug user who's indiscriminate in their relationships.
Well,
As
that's
opposed
accurate.
as opposed to an Aquarian who might be very interested in history, research, antiquities, novelty, and who wants to sort of be kind of an adventurer in some respects to explore things, using their imagination. So I mean, some of those qualities will overlap, but signs, I mean, what people exposed to the minimum of Western astrology get over obsessed and placed undue prominence upon signs. Signs are just a backdrop. It's like sitting in a theater and looking at the backdrop of the stage. That's what a sign is. The real action happens when the actors walk on stage. The planets are the actors. They're the moving elements in a horoscope that transit through one sign and into another. And one planet rules the ascendant, and the moon is an important factor. People often, get sidetracked obsessing about signs, and it's not the right way to interpret a chart. We've got to start with the nature of planets, and then see them contextualized against certain signs.
Against backdrops. I like that.
Yeah.
Really, that is a really cool interpretation of like the stage and the backdrop and the actors. I like how you explain that. So thank you for that. Yeah, I've had, and I've even within Western astrology, I've had many variations of explanations of the interpretation of my chart. So, and that's like you were saying, that must be like, it's that Hellenistic view that had just changed over time because there was no oral tradition that got passed on. And so it's all an interpretation of those extant writings that it's everybody's an interpreter, like everybody interprets it different, right? So
well, there are three major systems. There's Vedic astrology, which originates in India, has an unbroken tradition for a couple of millennia. There's Hellenistic astrology, which is popular today thanks to a couple of people, Chris Brennan and Dimitri George, who've published excellent books on the topic and done lots of research. But it's being reborn as we speak over the last decade. But it was pretty much a dead science for a couple of centuries. And then there's Western astrology, which comes out of the Arabic tradition, Greek Arabic tradition, which has been more sort of ongoing throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and modern times. So there's three different kinds of astrology. And then practitioners, I mean, it's as varied as I don't know, pick a profession. Artists, musicians, writers, it's as varied as that. I mean, and people, are exposed to different material in terms of their education. They have different teachers. Some are totally book learned, and others, take courses through university-like institutions and get a thorough grounding in everything. So somebody who announces themselves an astrologer, their credentials could be zip, or they could be extensive, and you have no way of knowing typically have no way of knowing the right questions to ask. Like, where did you study? Who's your teacher? How did you learn? Et cetera, et cetera. It's like a lawyer always has that diploma behind his desk, says, I graduated from McGill or the University of Toronto, and you take that as evidence of a professional education. With astrology, it's an unregulated profession. Caveat emptor, buyer beware.
yeah, And that's true for a lot of things, and sort of in what we'll call like the new age stuff, right? So
Sure, life coaching,
healers
for
and all of
instance.
that. Yeah, you could go from having like full on training as a healer, or you could have that weekend workshop and all of a
Yep,
sudden you are out there, hands on bodies.
yep.
So we're going to head to our first commercial break. When we come back, we're going to actually talk a bit about some of the content in Alan's book, how that might actually relate to you guys, why you'd want to buy this book, and how it's going to help you out. So stay tuned. We're going to be talking about the book when we come back. You're listening to The Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for The Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Are you a subject matter expert? Are you here to share your expertise with an audience waiting to hear from you in only the way you can deliver? Are you ready to have your voice amplified across the airwaves? Inspired Choices Network has a global radio platform streaming to millions of people across the world. Professionally produced and supported by an accomplished team every step of the way, you can broadcast from anywhere in the world, knowing your voice matters, and we ensure it is delivered with ease and efficiency. Eager to hear your message, the world awaits. Contact us today to become an Inspired Choices Network radio host. Email become a host at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com.
This is The Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@milicajelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. For those of you who don't know Alan Annand, he and I go way back in the day to when we were working at a bookstore in Toronto. And we were both doing readings out of this place called the Omega Center, which was the kind of the spiritual hub store of Toronto at the time. There were a few, but the Omega Center was the it place to be. And I would randomly run into Alan. And then when Facebook started up, found Alan again in the Facebook land, and have had the pleasure of having him on the show where we've talked about astrology before. So for those of you who haven't listened to that episode, please go back and find that as well and enjoy that episode. I think for a lot of reasons I love having you on, Alan, is because there isn't a lot of talk about Vedic astrology. For one, we hear when I'm like on TikTok or I'm on Instagram, all the astrology I'm seeing is all Western astrology. And so I think there's like nobody's really hearing about it. And, you know, maybe in this, you know, in the North American culture, we don't hear about it a lot. So I think it's fabulous to get this information out there for people to know there's other ways to understand yourself and get new interpretations on that. So if people would like to get, are you still doing private charts for people? Are you mostly writing these days? If people
yes.
would like to get, yeah, awesome.
Still doing
so
consultations, of course.
Awesome. So people can get a hold of you. Would they get a hold of you through your website? How would they do that to get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can probably just Google me, Alan Annand, astrologer, or Vedic Astrologer, Toronto, and the website that might get posted at the end of the show, navamsa.com, NAVAMSA.com. That should do it, one or the other.
Awesome. So if you're interested to find out more about who you are in Vedic astrology, I highly recommend that you would go to Alan, because not only does he have the background, has the education, he has years of experience in both Western astrology and in Vedic astrology. So to me, there's a sort of a different interpretation he can bring to you, because he comes from a background, so he can actually bring you information that is, to me, how can I explain this other than when you've learned one thing and then you went, wait a second, I need more information. Then you learn something else and you go, oh, there's some keys here that are really good. You bring a different interpretation to it than somebody who's maybe only studied one or the other. So I think it's, even though you might, your focus is Vedic astrology, you bring different knowledge to it. I don't know how else to explain that. So I think there's a lot of value in what you can add to a chart reading. So for those of you who are just joining in, Alan has written a book about, it's actually about all things fun on that I love talking about on this show, like marriage, sexuality, and all of this from a different perspective. So it's called Kama Yoga, Love, Marriage, and Sexuality in Jyotish. So can you tell us, what is, for one thing, I don't know this word Jyotish. Can you tell me what that is and tell us a little bit about the book?
Yeah. Okay. The word is Jyotish, so it's easy to say.
Jyotish.
Just say Jo
Here we go.
and then say Tish.
Jo.
Jyotish. Yeah.
Okay,
so
cool.
Jyotish is a Sanskrit word that means science of light. Now, you think about somebody lying on a hillside at night, looking at the starry skies and the somewhat brighter spots of light that move across the sky, which are the planets. I mean, if you look at Mars or Saturn or whatever, Venus, it looks like a star until you observe it over many nights and you see, okay, that thing's not sitting still. It's actually drifting across the constellations. So the science of light, because you observe it through the pinpoints of light we see in the sky, but there's also a sort of a metaphysical notion to that as well too. The science of astrology sheds light on our identity, who we are as souls, spirits, personalities, embodied lives. So that's the combination. Jyotish, science of light.
Jyotish, I love it. The science of light. I'm sure there's like many ways to look at that science of light in our lives as well, not just like lying on the ground and looking up.
We all have a computer program and we can look at it that way too. Yeah,
for sure. So what inspired you, first of all, to write this book? Like, what was going on that had you go, it's time now to write this book?
Yeah. Well, let me show you this book first here.
Yeah.
The Intimate Sex Lives of Famous People. Okay. Are you interested?
Yes, that's awesome.
Yes, of course you are. Well, this is a modern volume that I bought a couple of years ago when I was sitting down to really work on this, because I got to confess, my original copy, which was a small red paperback, it was so dog-eared and torn, and it was like somebody once saw it and said, what did you have rough sex with this book or something? Like,
yes.
It looked like really beat up and it was falling apart. I had to get a better copy. I was looking for it tonight and I couldn't find it. But anyway, I read that book some 20 years ago. And as I read through it, and famous sex, intimate sex lives of famous people. And I thought, man, if I had the horoscopes of these people, I would have a field day looking at their charts to see if I could make sense of why they had such, spectacular sex lives, as the case might be. Pick some names:
fun.
Marlene Dietrich, Marquis de Sade, Wilt Chamberlain. It
Let's
goes
talk
on
about
and
the
on.
Marquis. Where was the Marquis born? I don't even know.
Where was he born? Well, like 17th century France.
Yeah.
I kind of forgotten his birth time myself now. But anyway, there's a whole lot of case studies in there, or profiles, mini biographies, which I found very fascinating. Anyway, so, several years ago, in part of my long-standing studies with my teacher, a renowned Western but Vedic astrologer named Hart Defoe, actually a resident of Toronto, who met his own Indian guru here in Toronto, did the classic thing, 15 years, one-on-one, a kind of a boot camp of Jyotish with this fellow. And so he gave many courses over the years, and I took most of them. And one of them had a significant module to it, was called, passion combinations. It was all about love, marriage, and to a lesser degree, sexuality. It didn't, amount to a whole lot in terms of a much larger course, but I went back to it over the past couple of years and dug into it much more and expanded it to the best of my abilities and wrote a lot of case studies, starting off with, using this book, Intimate Sex Lives of Famous People, as my kind of launch pad to see, get good bios. So I expanded this whole thing into quite a substantive book. I mean, I thought I was going to write this book in a year, but between the research and the case studies, and I had to read a lot of sex books too, because I can't go into this just as an astrologer, right? My teacher always said, do not just be a one-trick pony, play your song in stereo. So I read a lot of really great books on sex, and I mentioned one of them to you earlier by a woman called Mary Roach, who wrote this book called Bonk, The Curious Coupling of Science and Sex. There's some other ones that are maybe better known. Emily Nagoski, Come As You Are, is quite a well-known book now.
Yeah.
There's another one, Kate Lister, A Curious History of Sex. Yeah, there's some really brainy.
Fabulous. A Curious History of Sex, I've referred to that a lot, and actually Emily Nagoski's book as well, but A Curious History of Sex is a hoot and a half. I recommend anybody go get that.
Yeah, some of them are really good. The Story of Sex, A Graphic History Through the Ages. Yeah. Here's a catchy title, A Billion Wicked Thoughts, What the World's Largest Experiment Reveals About Human Desire. Basically all the stuff you can find on the net. Anyway, it goes on and on. There's a Sex at Dawn, The Prehistoric Origins of Modern Sexuality. Anyway, I won't read my entire bibliography, but I wanted to become infused with the subject. And I already had this other book for case histories. And of course, the internet is a gold mine for, you can start off with, David Duchovny, let's say, admitted sex addicts, right? Or Kanye West or whomever, and look into their charts and see whether, it fulfills the pro forma. So there's the book, Kama Yoga. I mean, I hope nobody confuses this with a yoga book, but maybe people recognize the word Kama as in Kama Sutra, right? Kama just means the pursuit of pleasure. And you can pursue pleasure through listening to a symphony, having a glass of fine wine, or, the coupling of bodies, right? And there's so many ways to enjoy pleasure. So this is just one of them. Kama Yoga is actually, a certain little combination in the horoscope that, everything about your seventh house is wonderful. Seventh house is the part of partnership and sexuality. So when many, beneficial planets occupy it or influence it and so on and so forth, you would enjoy very successful relationships, including the sexual component as well, too. So starting off with, a skeleton set of rules with my teacher and many case histories, and armed with, the science of sex, as it were, in the human experience, I put together this book. And it took me 2 years to write it. I was kind of tired of it at the end, and I had cut it off. I wrote 60 case histories, but I ended up dropping 12 of them who were still living studies. And I thought in a litigious age as we are in, maybe I'll just leave those out. I can't afford to be sued. Anyway, so it's a very informative book. I mean, even somebody who doesn't know Vedic astrology, I swear that any Western astrologer could pick this up, and they already know the meanings of planets, the meanings of signs, the meanings of houses. It's very quick and easy to put together. The only thing is we're using a sidereal zodiac. But if you forget about that, it's just like, dipping into water like you've done before, and you can swim again just like, you did once before. So it's a pretty easy conversion. Okay. What can I say about this? It's a great book to give people a sense of, well, you go out in the dating world, you have your own desires, and you'll meet X number of people. And if only you were armed with a horoscope, you might know where to put your efforts and where not to worry about, putting your efforts into it. Because there are some planets, Moon and Venus, for instance, are your notoriously romantic planets. Moon is by nature nurturing, sympathetic, intuitive, domestic. Venus is amorous, aesthetic, loving, sensual. Those two planets, if they influence your ascendant, so if you have Taurus rising, Cancer rising, or Libra rising, one of those two planets rule your ascendant. And then if one of those two planets is rising or setting in the horoscope and therefore influencing yourself in a astrologically significant way, these can be sort of tags that say you're a romantic, you're a sympathetic, sensual person. And these people are the ones that sort of naturally gravitate towards relationships. They're already positive about the prospect for a relationship. Conversely, there are another two planets, Mercury and Saturn, which are quite, let's say, cynical, ambivalent, judgmental about the whole prospect of relationships. Mercury, for instance, is always regarded in the pantheon of planets as being adolescent, kind of youngish, immature. And so an adolescent or an immature person is not ready for adult relationships. Okay, and then on the other hand, Saturn, the most distant planet in our solar system, is regarded as literally cold, literally distant, and figuratively cold. A person who is, Saturn also rules old people too. So you've got Mercury who's too young, Saturn who's too old, Mercury who's too fickle, Saturn who's too serious. Those two planets are anathema to the idea of romance. So if you have Gemini or Virgo rising, or if you have Capricorn or Aquarius rising, there's a bit of a hard-nosed sort of attitude towards relationships. Well, I don't know if this is good for me. I'd rather be by myself. I'd rather play games. I'd rather watch hockey than be involved in a relationship, all this sort of thing. So if you've got that kind of person with those ascendants rising, or if Mercury or Saturn plays a dominant influence upon the horoscope, these people are less inclined, in fact, even ambivalent, maybe even totally reluctant to engage in relationships. Now, if you were to know that beforehand, you would not waste your dating dollars dining and wining somebody who is of a mercurial Saturnian disposition, because at the end, they're just not going to put out because they're not inclined. Okay, I'm being crude for illustrative purposes.
That's the way it is.
Whereas the lunar and Venusian types are already inclined. They're halfway there already. As long as you treat them decently, they're ready to engage because they are romantics. They're hopeful, optimistic. Mercury and Saturn are kind of like pessimistic, judgmental, going to analyze the situation too much. Okay, well, I'll go out with you, but what kind of job you got? What's your degree? Where do you live? All these sort of, ifs, ands, and buts, the caveats. Yeah, Moon and Venus are not like that. So this is a helpful thing for anybody. And, through, informed horoscopy, we can look at any chart. Well, we can look at any chart. Some of them are easy to judge. Some of them are more complicated. Let's be fair. It's like medicine. Somebody walks in, doc, I feel terrible. The doctor takes one look and says, I can tell by your complexion, stick out your tongue or whatever. You got this. That's wrong with you. Another person's got to go through a battery of tests and the doctor still doesn't know. I got to get a colleague to judge, right? So horoscopy can be complicated, but there are a lot of rules here that make it easier for you to engage and do what we call force distribution. Put X number of people in this camp and say, you're less likely to engage, and another whole bunch of people in the other camp and say, you are likely to engage. And now if you, mix the engagees with each other, you'll have a party. Whereas the ones who are ambivalent and reluctant, well, they can go off to the library or go watch a hockey game or something, or go home by themselves. Because that's sort of their fate or destiny. Planets are drivers of psychological impulses. There's other factors in the horoscope that say, actually, no matter how much of a romantic you are and how hard you work it, maybe it'll never play out anyway. That's a different thing, right? You can want it. This is the what's his name? Tony Robbins school of thought, right? Tony Robbins, motivational speaker, who says, in effect, look, if you just want it bad enough, you'll get it. And how many people go to these millionaire mind seminars wanting to be millionaires? And do they all become millionaires? No, they've all done the right things, but they don't have the fate for it. So that's another factor.
There's also, when we're talking about relationships, there's also the free will of the other person, right? So as much as you can say, I want to be with that person, you got free will involved too. So we'll talk more about all these fun things. We're heading to our next commercial break. You're listening to The Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for the Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Interested in masturbating for money, copulating for consciousness, and pleasuring on purpose? 21 Days of Sexual Magicism with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic is an exploration of tools, processes, and actions that you can use to create more for your life, your body, your money inflows, and so much more. Graduated learning for all levels of interest. Learn at your own pace via video classes or join the yearly live class. Take a peek at www.milicajelenic.com.
How wonderful would it be to carry your favorite Inspired Choices Network host with you throughout your day? Well, now you can. Inspired Choices Network now has its very own mobile app. Our free app offers live streaming shows, along with thousands of podcasts and TV episodes. Our shows cover a wide variety of topics. Whether you're waking up with us, carrying us through the day, and taking us to bed with you, we're always here for you to enjoy. We're easy to find. Just search for Inspired Choices Network in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store.
This is the Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@MilicaJelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Alan Annand, who's a Vedic astrologer, also an author, and all-around funny guy. If you want to follow him on social media, go find him and follow his work. Also, go get his book. So, Alan, they can get your book on Amazon? Can they also, are there links through your website as well to get that, or is it specifically just through Amazon right now?
You will find links on my websites for the book, but those will simply lead you to Amazon. So the best thing to do is just go Alan Annand Amazon books, and bingo, you'll find me that way.
Awesome. So other than this book, all of your sexy noir books on the astrologer gone rogue detective, are those are all also ones that we can find.
Everything is there on Amazon. Yeah, that's right.
Awesome.
Easy one-stop shop.
So for in the last 2 years, with all your research through the historically great sexy people and looking at their charts, were there any people that you found the most outstanding, or was there somebody who stands out the most that you were studying that you're like, stays in your mind?
Wilt Chamberlain is an outstanding example because, what's his claim that he slept with something like 15,000 women or 10,000? I mean, people have taken him to task on that. Like, Wilt, are you exaggerating a little bit? That means since the, age of 15, you had 1.5 women every day. Yeah, well, he allegedly kept a day timer in which he logged all his conquests, including ratings on women as well, too. And this sounds, kind of salacious, but he said he never, ever once slept with a married woman, which is something. And say what?
That he knew of, I'm sure.
Well, that may be true too. Yeah. But and he said he valued women who were well read and well traveled and enjoyed good food and obviously enjoyed sex. He had in his the bedroom of his mansion, king size bed, needless to say, and with a remote control, it would open the panel in the roof to have a window on the stars. He thought it was a very romantic thing to do. He said he never wanted to get married because he simply enjoyed his sex life too much, and he thought marriage would interfere with that. But he said he did fall in love like half a dozen times, and he struggled hugely to push them away at the time when he still wanted to be with them, but felt that if he did that, that would be the end of another part of his life. He's a pretty remarkable case. I got 48 case studies in this book, so it's pretty remarkable. Marlene Dietrich is another one, famous film star of the silent era, coming out of Europe, and then came to Hollywood in the early days. She was a cross-dresser back in the days of the Weimar Republic in Berlin, and had a pretty wild and active love life with members of both sexes. And she had a coterie of gal pals in Hollywood that were all of a similar persuasion, either lesbian or bisexual, and they would trade stories and partners sometimes. And she had a hugely active love life as well too. Sarah Bernhardt as well too claimed to have had over 1,000 lovers. She was feted and dined and wined and pursued by royalty all over Europe. This was in the 19th century. That's another infamous case. Jimi Hendrix, was admittedly, they say there was nothing he was better at other than guitar than sex. Sex and guitar were his primal pursuits, and that once he got into his heyday, never went to bed with women solo. There was always two, or maybe yet another standby, like 2 or 3 women. They said that he went through women like Kleenex. Okay, so some of this is not admirable in today's environment, perhaps, with STDs and all the rest of that. But,
there were
STDs
then too, but they didn't seem to give
Yes, they didn't get the airplay that they did in day. Rajneesh, the famous Indian sex guru, successfully rebranded himself as Osho. But in his day, this was back in the 60s and 70s, in India, they're basically a kind of a devoted to sex ashram where people would go there and have basically bacchanals for days and weeks on end, and everyone is encouraged to really get naked and have fun and get and squeeze every last bit of pleasure out of you.
Alan,
and your
did you go to those?
Fellow devotees. Nah, I was too young to go. And besides,
not even in the 80s.
A gentleman never
tells.
Okay. A gentleman never tells.
Unless you're in the famous book, right? And then, so did any of their charts look like, when you read their stories and then you looked at their charts? Did it make sense to you when you looked at it? You went, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, what were some that just made total sense?
You got to remember that, the case studies that I ended up using are, of course, this is in effect a kind of a textbook, right? And when you're teaching principles, you don't use crappy examples, right? You use examples that illustrate the very thesis that you're attempting to use. But I had to read I ended up writing 60 case histories, but I probably read about, 150 detailed, sex life biographies. But many a time the chart did not stand up to the scrutiny. The chart had only 1 or 2 principles that showed that, they were a horn dog or whatever, or a nymphomaniac. But what you actually want is a chart that's rich with the principles, and it has not only 1, but 2, but 3 of these classic principles that said that they, were highly passionate individuals, and would stand no interference with the pursuit of their pleasures. And those are the ones that make good case studies. And others I use people that really did have like wildly rampant super active sex lives, because the very story of their sex life made for good reading in itself. So sometimes I would, I'm trying to balance that. People with a really good story, but also a matching horoscope that actually successfully illustrates all those principles. I mean, this book is half case studies, but they're illustrative case studies. There's maybe 200, 250 words of mini bio, and then like 300 words or so of astrological delineation that explain why they are like they are. I mean, the book is pretty rich. I mean, I could have just stuck to horoscopy as well, to strict astrological principles, but I worked in famous love stories of history, Antony and Cleopatra, Romeo and Juliet, partly to illustrate some basic principles of human nature, famous erotica of the over the years, like the story of O, Delta of Venus, 50 Shades of Grey, etc. And again, summarize those with a point to drawing connections between principles that appeared in the book and the primary planets, which are Moon and Venus, the romantics, what I call the good girls of the zodiac, because they are the female and the romantics, versus the bad boys of the zodiac, which are Mars, who is a warrior, and Saturn, who is a control freak. And so those two, pairs, those two good girls and those two bad boys, that's the magic combination to have a party going. You need a good girl and you need a bad boy. Better yet, if you have two good girls and two bad boys coupled in the same chart, you've got a little mini orgy going on in the horoscope. And such a horoscope then is likely to catch fire. And then there's two other points in a horoscope that play a significant role. In Western astrology, it's called the north node of the moon and the south node of the moon. They're simply points in the moon's orbit where eclipses occur. In Vedic astrology, they have names, Rahu and Ketu. So they're celestial serpent, a head and tail of a symbolic serpent. They are they're like adding accelerants to the bad boys and good girls of the zodiac. It's like you can have bad boys and good girls in a room together. So you bring in some alcohol or drugs, because Rahu and Ketu, they rule stimulants of all kinds. And they also rule sort of kinkiness, weird stuff, outside the box kind of thinking. So, it's all that sort of dimension. Good girls and bad boys, add this cocktail, shake and stir, and then you get a pretty volatile combination. And that basically, in essence, is the formula for sexual energy in a horoscope. When you have at least one good girl coupled with one bad boy, I mean, that is the bare minimum. And then pile on some more if you can, and you have a little party and mix it up, and it can be, then you get some pretty remarkable case studies. And in these case studies that I used, there's excellent examples. It's really quite a learning package, and fun reading too, even if it's just for the vicarious delight of reading about 48 people who had outstanding sex lives. I mean, I got a little standard biography. What are they famous for in life? Actor, writer, magician, whatever, basketball player. But then, more than half of their little mini bio is about their sex life and what they did to whom and so on. I've got a good mix of the heterosexual and the homosexual. For instance, who's in here? Christopher Isherwood. I don't know whether you know him, a famous writer. Robert Mapplethorpe. Do you remember him? He was a famous New York photographer who became famous for taking pictures of black penises. How would you not know about this?
Yes, I do know about that one. I just didn't know his name, but yeah, I do know about that one.
And there's a few others. I mean, there's a nice mix here. André Gide, another famous writer of yesteryear, a Somerset Maugham, another British writer of yesteryear, all sort of infamous homosexuals. Somerset Maugham was a British writer who enjoyed great success, but he was living a kind of a scandalous life where he moved to the Riviera. And he said the Riviera is a nice sunny place for shady characters. And he used to have like all night bacchanals with, friends and local boys. He had a buddy who would go out as a kind of a procurer and always have a fresh stock of fresh young flesh for pool parties. And visitors who would go, to his villa and see that they were shocked, like just couldn't believe the level of sexual activity going on. Anyway, so he's one of the case studies as well. I've cherry picked a lot of these for their exciting value as far as reading goes. So you learn a lot of astrology, and you learn a lot about other people's sex lives. Plus which, I worked in all the sort of statistics on divorce, marriage, divorce, sex and the brain, academic studies on sexuality, covered all those famous people that, wrote about sex: Krafft Ebing, Sigmund Freud, Havelock Ellis, what's his name? Alfred Kinsey, Masters and Johnson, and Cher Haidt. And actually did little astrological profiles of them too, to illustrate why would such academics be so obsessed about, obsessed, yeah, so interested. Well, some people did. Sure. I mean, Alfred Kinsey, totally got into it.
He was very obsessed, yeah.
Yeah, he and his wife had sex with many of their friends and professional associates. He reconverted his attic into being a little kind of a sex cave, and filmed everybody.
And they filmed a lot too, yeah.
He did.
It was all for research, Alan. So that's what they were up to.
You could justify so much by saying it's research. Research. All I did for research was read a lot of books. Okay.
I love it. Sure. So for those of you who are listening, we've only got a few minutes left of the show. I know time flies when you're talking sex and marriage and love and all things sexuality.
Sedona.
Yes.
I've got to say this. If I've got 1 minute to say it,
you've got a course going on. I'd love to hear about it.
This whole book, basically, I'm going to teach the cream of it in a course, a weekend immersion in Sedona, exactly 2 months from now, June 1st to 4th, in Sedona, Arizona, a retreat put on by Shine Sanctuary. So if you Google Shine, Sedona, Sanctuary, sex, Vedic Astrology, Alan Annand, whatever, any combination of that, you'll find your way to this site, and you'll be able to, plug into that as well. It's a little bit much for the lay person, but for anybody who knows any astrology, there's an introductory component for those who know some astrology but don't know anything about Jyotish or Vedic astrology. That primes them for the basic stuff, and then you can be part of this workshop, immersion intensive, and learn a whole lot about seeing people through their horoscopes in a very different way. It really is quite powerful.
Well, let's get you guys out getting the book. For those of you who don't, who have no idea and are just now getting interested, go get the book. Also contact Alan, get your chart done, see who you are when it comes to your love life and your sex and life. Are you with the person that you're, are you guys working well together? Is your relationship mixed up and messed up? Find out. And so you can contact Alan, search him up, Alan Annand. Also, definitely check out the books, all of them through Amazon.com. If you're into all things fun that have to do with, like as it was called, the Sherlock Holmes. I love that. the Sherlock Holmes version of sex and all things fun. And with Sherlock Holmes with astrology, like how fun is that? So if you're into that, go get any and all of his books for sure. And I encourage you to, if you are curious and if you already do astrology and this show has given you some ideas or insights and curiosity, check out the course that is going on at Shine in Sedona. What a great location. Like you can't get much more woo-woo than Sedona. Other than here in Ontario, near where I live, which we are like the Sedona of the North. So, there's all these Sedonas in the world, lots of great places with converging energies. So for those of you who are also just wondering, like, what did I just listen to? Like, I just got so much information. I don't even know what just happened. And some of those books that Alan were mentioning that interest you, like we were talking about the sex lives of famous people, check some of these books out. They might just get you interested, intrigued, and get you going into a whole new research ideas for your life. I love researching sex, so any and all books on that are great. And in 2 weeks, I'm going to be geeking out with actually Ceres, who has a show on Inspired Choices Network, also who loves to talk about sex. And we're going to be geeking out about our favorite sex books and sex TV shows at some point as well. Thank you, Alan, for coming on. We've got 5 seconds left. I want you all to stay tuned in and turned on.
Thank you for listening to The Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. The Pleasure Zone returns next Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Mountain, and 5 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. We hope you'll join us. Until then, have the best week of your life by choosing to be turned on and tuned in to your body.